In today's video, I'm going to be picking every single Week 10 college football game using this beautiful website, Playoff Predictors, where we go through every week and pick every single game. We're already a couple of games into Week 10 already. There's the Tuesday and Wednesday midweek CUSA action. We even got some Sunbelt action on Tuesday. We'll talk about some of those results. We'll go in and pick every single game outside of that. I'll start with the usual disclaimer I have that I'm not going to be able to go super crazy in depth to every single matchup because we are picking all the games, but we'll be sure to make an extra long stop at each of the biggest games of the weekend. So let's talk about some of the ones that already went down. Kennesaw State winning a game versus UTEP. I believe that has gotten them to bowl eligibility. Let me just check. Yeah, 6-2 the record now. So congratulations to the Owls. A massive achievement for them getting their first ever bowl game. UTEP just been right there, right on the fringe of having several wins this year. They almost got it done versus the Owls, but it was all for naught. James Madison blowing the doors off Texas State. The buzz is definitely there for the Dukes as a potential playoff contender this year. We saw Jacksonville State go on the road and escape with a win against Middle Tennessee. They look like a contender in the CUSA. And then Missouri State, now one game away from bowl eligibility. Technically, they can't make a bowl game this year because they don't the transition rules to the FBS from the FCS, but it's possible for an exception to occur that could get them there. Another tough loss for FIU. They end up losing 28-21. But that gets us into some of the Thursday action that will take place today, so we will make picks on these games. We start with Marshall at Coastal Carolina. Marshall's had a very impressive turnaround recently. They looked like not a great team. They had a home loss against Missouri State that looked really bad. It's aged a lot better with how Missouri State's season has gone, but they were in a difficult position, but they've ripped off a couple straight wins now. Now it appears they could potentially be in Sunbelt contention, and there's been a few wins that have springboarded them to that. So on the road versus a Coastal Carolina team that's been very inconsistent this year, I think Marshall's just playing good football. So I think they go on the road and beat the Chanticleers. I just have a little bit more faith in Marshall based on what they've shown this season. Tulane hits the road to play UTSA. They're just short of a touchdown favorite against the Roadrunners. UTSA's just had a lot go wrong for them. Tulane needs to be careful, though. They played against East Carolina and kind of had a scare. I think that was a couple of weekends ago now. So Tulane's obviously a very good team. We've seen them at their highs. We've also seen some lows for them this season where they've let inferior opponents stick around with them. UTSA is an unfortunate case study this year. Jeff Traylor, a guy whose name was probably floating around in a lot of big jobs, not as much this year with how this last season and then the season before went for him or have gone for him at UTSA. So I'm going to pick Tulane to get the job done on the road. So I'm rocking with two road favorites on a Thursday night. That's kind of a scary thing to do. If I remember correctly, I don't know if I did too well on the Thursday and Friday picks. So we'll get to Friday. Memphis hits the road to play Rice. Rice coming off of a very nice win over UConn. Memphis coming off of an excellent upset victory over South Florida. But we've also seen some lows from each of these teams. Rice has had some bad losses this year. Memphis had the bad loss to UAB the weekend prior. So another potential letdown spot for Memphis, especially after the high of that upset victory. I don't think they're going to quite be susceptible to a loss here, but we've seen crazier things. And like I said, Rice beat a really good UConn team last week. So we'll see what happens as Memphis hits the road on a Friday night. North Carolina heads on the road to play Syracuse. Syracuse has been very down since that upset victory they got over Clemson. The injury, obviously, to Steve Angeli has clearly affected this team. They've had a few spirited efforts, but for the most part, they've been waxed by teams. But North Carolina is not exactly great either, and so this is one where something has to give. Somebody that's on a rough losing streak has to get a win. I think it'll be Syracuse, one reason only, and that's going to be because of coaching in this one. I just think Syracuse is going to find a way to manufacture just a little bit more. North Carolina has been almost completely dysfunctional this year. Sam Houston at Louisiana Tech is really cool. Somebody told me that because this game is being played on Halloween, Sam Houston's going orange out, Louisiana Tech's going black out. That is super cool aesthetically. Sam Houston's season has been awful, so this will be a cool thing to participate in. Sam Houston's still looking for that first win on the season. I don't think this is where they get it. Louisiana Tech's had a couple embarrassing collapses over the last couple of weeks that took them from CUSA contention to they're just scrapping for a bowl game. They need a bowl game really badly. Sonny Cumbie needs it, otherwise he's going to be on the hot seat. I think this is going to be a win that gets them within one game of bowl eligibility. Army plays Air Force for the Commander-in-Chief Trophy. We're to the Saturday games now. Both these teams have kind of had a down year thus far. I think Army's just shown a little bit more life. Air Force, no defense to speak of. They have been a pretty high-flying offense, pretty high-scoring offense. But again, Army's shown and given me just a little bit more reason to believe. Buffalo at Bowling Green, a couple of teams that are on some tough skids. I believe it was Buffalo who lost to Akron last week, and Bowling Green lost to Kent State. Pretty crazy turn of events with those two teams showing life in the MAC, and now both these teams reeling, trying to get bounce-back victories. I don't know. Buffalo seems like they've been on a skid for a while now. They should have lost to UMass the week prior. I believe they're slight favorites versus Bowling Green here, but I think Bowling Green gets the win at home. It's crazy how quickly this season got out of hand for Buffalo, a team that looked like a MAC title contender and is now starting to let it slip away. So I'm going to take Bowling Green. Eddie Georgia's squad still kind of in that middle tier of the MAC, trying to fight for a bowl game this year. UCF is going to be playing Baylor out in the Big 12. UCF has had a couple pleasantly surprising games where they've shown up and they've been spirited and they've gotten a couple wins where I didn't think they'd get wins. I thought they'd be a little bit more lifeless this year. Baylor, on the other hand, extremely disappointing. They now sit at 4-4 on the year after that loss to TCU, and some questions are starting to go around Waco, around Dave Aranda. It just feels like things are not in a super great spot right now with the job security discussions that you're having. And looking at some of the results, the close games that Baylor's had, you could argue their record is closer to like 2-6 than it is to 6-2. So not feeling great about the Bears right now. Who knows what happens in the back half of the season or final third of this season. They did go on a nice tear and winning streak at the end of last year that really revitalized them and the confidence in Aranda. But at this point, I think UCF wins on the road as an underdog. I've seen them do it a couple times this year, win as an underdog, and I think this could be another spot where they make it happen. Duke heads on the road to play Clemson. Clemson has not been the same team at home this year. They have had several losses at home and several games at home where they have just not looked intimidating in the slightest. And I don't know if Duke's going to be intimidated in this one. They're in for a dogfight against the Blue Devils, and Duke's shown a lot of really great stuff. When they take care of the football, they're pretty much capable of beating anyone in the ACC this year. And I just think they're going to go on the road and outduel a Clemson team that is just dealing with a lot of outside noise and a lot of adversity. And for Duke, I mean, the position they're in, I think that they're feeling great about how their season's gone, despite a couple of weird losses. Clemson's in kind of a similar position, and they're feeling awful. And I just think the toll that can take on you by the time you reach November could swing in Duke's favor here. Penn State at Ohio State is a little bit of a depressing matchup to look at because this was supposed to be one of the marquee matchups of the season. It's two teams that were at least top 4 in national title odds, maybe even both top 3 or top 2, depending on where you looked. They were the two co-favorites to win the Big Ten in the offseason. This was thought to be a massive swing game and a huge game for James Franklin. Franklin gets fired before he even gets to this one. So now it's just going to be Penn State with an interim. They're still scrapping to try and qualify for a bowl game this year. Just doesn't feel likely. Ohio State going to be favored by, I believe, 20.5 was the line I saw, and that seems appropriate. I think the Buckeyes are going to win this one pretty handily, but who knows? Penn State still has the talent on their roster. Yes, they don't have Drew Aller at quarterback, but they have the same amount of talent that was there. So arguably, there is a way. There's a world where they can win this one. Miami heads on the road to play SMU. This is one of the ones I definitely wanted to highlight because all of the alarm bells are going off in my head. Miami's close to a 2-touchdown favorite here, but they were also close to a 2-touchdown favorite versus Louisville. That one, they were at home, and they end up losing. And it feels like people have kind of just put that one away and considered it a fluke. But now there's a couple things working against Miami. First off, this is their first time leaving the state of Florida this season. They've had a couple road games already, but they were all within the state of Florida. So first time leaving the state of Florida, which is crazy. They're not really used to these road games. They got to go all the way to Dallas. They're playing an SMU team that is a solid team. Yes, SMU had the tough loss to Wake Forest, but they can get up and they can score, and they've shown that this season. They're going to test this Miami defense, and certainly they can make some plays happen with their defense on their own right. They had a great game against Wake Forest last week on the defensive side of the football. And also, there's a couple things working against Mario Cristobal at Miami. This game is on November 1st. Mario Cristobal has a 4-8 record in the month of November at Miami. That's really going to get tested this year. They've got 5 games in the month of November with the 1st, 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th. So Canes are really, truly going to get tested here, and we're going to learn just how real of a contender they are this season. With all of that working against them, I do think SMU is just a bit too flawed to pull that one off, but let me tell you, I would not want to be Miami when they're having to play on the road versus Pitt later this year. That's kind of the one I've got circled as one that could be a potential letdown spot, but this one is also certainly one. It would not surprise me if SMU pulled off the upset outright. UAB, a little bit of life in their season. Last time we saw them, they upset Memphis. It's the last thing UConn wants to hear. They had this game circled as one of the easier games on their schedule, but now here they are. They got to lock in. UConn thought they could maybe cruise to, I think they were sitting pretty at 2 losses before that loss last week. They've had a couple tough ones. They lose in overtime to Delaware. They end up losing that one to Syracuse, and then they actually lost to, who was it that we touched on? Rice as well. So I believe that puts them at 3 losses. This is a big one for them in terms of setting them up for a successful season that they can still very much have. I just find it ironic that UConn lost those games to Delaware and to Rice, and now has a testy one versus UAB, and it was Boston College that they beat the tar out of, one of those power conference teams. So kind of wild how things have flip-flopped with UConn's schedule, and that's something that can happen when you're independent, is the schedule dynamics change often. West Virginia and Houston take each other on in a Big 12 battle. Houston suddenly has emerged as a Big 12 title contender after an upset victory at Arizona State, and it's put them in some rarefied air recently for this program, and for the first time since they've been in the Big 12. West Virginia has looked largely lifeless. I'm not crazy high on Houston. I don't think they're an incredible team, but they've certainly gotten some fortunate breaks, and you look at their schedule down the stretch here, they could absolutely find themselves in the Big 12 title game, which is pretty nuts to say. And up to this point, their only losses to Texas Tech. So Houston has themselves in a pretty great position here. They just need to play a good game. They've played some bad games this year. There's a scenario where West Virginia can be in this one. I'm thinking of that Oregon State game that Houston played. A lot of bizarre circumstances in that one. They are at home here at least. Rutgers, Illinois, a Big 10 swing game. Rutgers has just been very disappointing. They did get a nice win against Purdue last week on that walk-off field goal. That was a huge one. That was one Rutgers really needed. They would love to have this one too. On the road against Illinois, though, it just feels like it's too tall of a task. This is still an excellent Illinois squad. They just ran into a Washington team that was hungry for a win, and just a little bit hungrier for them. It was on the road in a tough environment as well. Illinois gets to come back home. I think they get a win over Rutgers. I believe this one drops Rutgers to 4-5. So you talk about the narratives, how the season's going, could go a lot of different ways. If Schiano gets them to 6 wins in a bowl game, maybe they get an upset win here and there, 7-5 maybe even. All of a sudden, we're talking about Rutgers in a very positive light. If they lose out, they go 4-8, 5-7. All of a sudden, it's a much different conversation about Greg Schiano. Is he the guy for Rutgers long term? I think it's interesting that those conversations are being had around Rutgers, so we'll see what happens there. Navy and North Texas is a big-time Group of 5 battle in the American Conference. Navy still undefeated. North Texas, the one loss to South Florida. They're back home. This is where they did take their one loss, but they've got a phenomenal signal caller in Drew Mestemaker. A lot of people have shed light on his incredible story. Now he leads this team. But Navy, I just feel like is getting overlooked. North Texas is around a touchdown favorite here. I just think to how the midshipmen dismantle teams in conference play, and I think they're still capable of doing that. North Texas, I know conventionally and based on their profile, they look like the better team, but there's something to be said about that physicality that Navy plays with, and I just think that that is something that can absolutely neutralize and level a playing field. I don't think we're going to be catching Navy looking ahead at all in this game. I think they're going to be ready and up for it, and I think they're going to be up for the challenge and beat North Texas, which pains me a little bit to say because North Texas is one of like my offseason darlings that I was like, guys, North Texas is going to be really good this year. And not a lot of people wanted to hear it because there were still some questions about that defense. I had North Texas preseason 8 in my Group of 5 top 25, and people thought I was crazy. Here we are. North Texas looks awesome, but I also had Navy a little bit higher than them because I believe in Navy, and I think they go get it done. Look out for Blake Horvath in this one. Maybe he launches a late-season Heisman campaign with a victory here, and maybe Mestemaker does the same thing if North Texas gets a win. Here we've got one of the big ones, Vanderbilt at Texas. One of these teams is ranked 9th. One of them is ranked 20th. If I told you in the offseason the team ranked 9th is Vanderbilt, you would have probably smacked me in the face and told me I was a loon. But here we are. Vanderbilt had back-to-back ranked victories now. They can make it 3 in a row on the road versus Texas. Texas has looked quite awful over the past couple of weeks, escaping in overtime versus Kentucky and Mississippi State. And now here they come. Arch Manning, questionable for this game. It's just a lot working against the Longhorns in this one. Their defense has also been very spotty. Mississippi State had no problem moving the football. Vanderbilt's going to want to slow this game down, and they're going to want to condense the game. It's what I always talk about with the Commodores. It's what their strategy for success is. They didn't play a very good game against Missouri last week. They very arguably should have and could have lost that game versus the Tigers, but they get a win. And I think for Vanderbilt to be able to have a performance like that and still come out with a win is extremely encouraging. I just think about, who do I trust more? Texas without Arch Manning at quarterback, or even with, or Diego Pavia, and what the Commodores have been able to do. Last week was ugly. We've seen some of those duds from the Commodores, but when that happens, their defense just seems to answer the call. So Vanderbilt has just responded too many times this season in these exact types of scenarios. I think they keep it rolling. I think they get it done, and I think they beat Texas as a short underdog. I think the spread's around 2 or 3.5 in Texas' favor in this one. I'm really confident, actually, the Commodores are going to go and get this one done, and it's crazy what we are talking about with Vanderbilt football right now, the rarefied air that they are in. And that's the second time I've said rarefied air in this video. Not something I thought I'd say, but here we are. Arizona State hits the road to play the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State and Arizona State have seen their seasons kind of careen off a cliff in the last couple of weekends. ASU has the blowout loss to Utah, the very disappointing and ugly start versus Houston, and loses both of those games. And both of those games largely tied to the health of their quarterback, Sam Leavitt, a little bit of it with Jordan Tyson, who was out in the Houston game. Basically, Arizona State, when Sam Leavitt is not the signal caller, is awful on offense, just awful. And it seems to trickle over to the defense somehow. They just play literally terrible football. They look like a 3-9 team when Sam Leavitt is not on the field. And then when you couple that with no Jordan Tyson, it really hurts. Iowa State, on the other hand, they've dealt with attrition in their own right. They lose 2 starting cornerbacks for the season. They've had guys dinged up left and right. Fortunately for them, their quarterback is still healthy. They are also at home. They came out fighting against BYU last week. They end up coming up short, but I think Iowa State wins this game, and I think they win it in blowout fashion. Like I said, there's just something that happens with this Arizona State team where they just fold. They literally fold with no Sam Leavitt, and it's unfortunate because I think the team was good this year. They were capable of some stuff, but it's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And last year, you could argue a few of those one-score games should have gone the other way against Arizona State, but they had the magical Big 12 title run. I think Iowa State's going to get revenge for that Big 12 title loss from last season and beat the Sun Devils decisively by multiple scores. Take -7.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5, whatever you can get for Iowa State. Take it. This is the budge guarantee. I think Iowa State's winning in blowout fashion. East Carolina is going to go on the road to play Temple. The Owls have been a very pleasantly surprising team this season, and they've gotten it done time and time again in spots where I didn't think they would necessarily get it done. They are running into an East Carolina team that I do really like a lot. We also saw East Carolina test Tulane a couple of weeks ago, and Temple nearly lost last week to Tulsa. So I don't know how well they're playing right now. East Carolina, I think, is going to go on the road and get the victory here. So going against the Owls pains me to say because I know there's a nice conglomerate of Temple Owls fans out there that support the channel, and I really appreciate you guys, but I'm going with East Carolina in this one. We'll see if I'm wrong. New Mexico hits the road to play UNLV, a couple of teams that have shown a ton of offensive firepower this year. With UNLV, a little less surprisingly so. A lot of people expected them to be great this year, but with New Mexico, it's been a surprise to most. Another one of my offseason darlings was New Mexico. They have been so awesome to watch this season. They get a nice win over Utah State, getting revenge over Bronco. And I just think New Mexico is just so awesome, man. And it's been great to have that take sort of vindicated and justified this year. I think they pull off a signature win here and an upset victory at UNLV. I think they stun the Rebels, a team that has had a very spotty defense at times. They've been caught in a few tough situations. I think New Mexico goes and gets it done. So I am rocking with the Lobos. We've got Louisville at Virginia Tech. This one is the MacGuffin game for those of you who celebrate the MacGuffin. But in terms of actual football sense, Virginia Tech trying to find their identity with an interim head coach. They did beat Cal, which was a promising thing to have happen. They are at home for this one. Tough spot for Louisville, kind of. I believe they're around a 10-point favorite, but a definite potential letdown spot. They've already lost to one team in the state of Virginia, and that was as a favorite. So could be a difficult set of circumstances for the Cardinals. I still think they're going to win. I'm looking for some of those skill players to step it up and perform like they have so many times this season. And I think Louisville gets another win and continues to establish themselves as a top contender in the ACC. Moving on, Boston College, 28.5-point underdogs to Notre Dame. No, thank you. Fighting Irish are going to beat the tar out of a team that is arguably one of the worst in the power conferences this season. Fresno State at Boise State was supposed to be one of the marquee matchups in the group of 5, but Fresno State has not held up their end of the bargain. They're coming off of a blowout loss to San Diego State. Huge shout out to the Aztecs, and I think that they're going to keep the bleeding going against Boise State. Broncos have quietly turned it on this year and are playing really well. So we'll see how things pan out in the Mountain West. Texas Tech at Kansas State. This matchup a lot scarier than it appeared to be a couple of weeks ago. Kansas State has figured out some stuff. They didn't just collapse in on themselves like a dying star this year like some people thought they might. hand up. I thought they might after how things were looking, but no, they've actually shown a lot of fight, and now they're back to 500, and they love nothing more than to upset Texas Tech to rejuvenate some life into this season that appeared to be a lost season. So could be a really interesting one here. I believe Texas Tech's a little over a touchdown favorite. I do think the Red Raiders go and get it done. They have been playing a little sloppy. They have had some injuries. Will Hammond being out for the year means you can't have Morton go down with an injury, because if he does, you're going to Mitch Griffiths, and I don't know if I have as much faith in Mitch Griffiths as I had in Will Hammond when he was operating. So going to be a difficult set of circumstances for the Red Raiders. Delaware, Liberty, CUSA battle. Liberty starting to turn their season around after a slow start. Delaware starting to see things slip away a little bit after a fast start to the season. So interesting crossroads here, and that's why I think Liberty gets the job done at home. They've just kind of stopped the bleeding a little bit, and it feels like they could go on a run here and still win the CUSA despite a series of awful losses to start this season. So definitely keep an eye out for the Flames down the stretch. Pitt goes on the road to play Stanford. Potentially a letdown spot for Pitt. This is called Stanford's disease. Stanford does it against teams all the time. They drag them into the mud. They pull off wins. They've pulled off a couple of wins. I honestly think Frank Reich potentially in the running to be the next head coach based on how things have gone this season for Stanford. But Pitt has been on another level. They're coming off a blowout victory last weekend. I think Pitt's going to keep it going. I think they're going to get another win here in convincing fashion. Mason Heinschel has totally transformed the way their offense operates. It's crazy how they moved away from Holstein, and that's happened, but here we are. Pitt football is kind of back. And again, dangerous team in the ACC. If I'm Miami, that is one of the teams I am the most scared of that is left on my schedule more than any other team, especially considering how little room for error there is for Miami if they want to make the ACC title. Georgia and Florida going to battle at a neutral site in Jacksonville. I ratioed a guy on Twitter the other day because he said that Georgia was going into the swamp. I felt bad for him because that was a mistake that I've previously made before, and you just get absolutely dragged when it happens, but it's an unforgivable sin to say this game is not at a neutral site because it's always at a neutral site. From what I hear, I've never been there. It's one of the best neutral site games there is, just short of Texas, Oklahoma. I believe it based on the vibes this game produces. Could be a tough spot for Georgia. Florida has an interim head coach. They are coming off of a bye, and they could show up motivated. Last year, a very similar Florida team nearly took out Georgia. The game was going great until Lagway went down with an injury. Obviously, Lagway has struggled this season, but I think they'll come out motivated and ready in this rivalry game, trying to rally around a new leader in this one. Georgia has not been the cleanest team this year. They've had several sloppy performances, but I think they'll show up motivated and ready and confident because they've won this game the last 4 times it's been played. So I think they extend the streak to 5 and beat the Florida Gators again. And I think they evade what could be a sneaky upset bid here in Week 10. Old Dominion on the road versus ULM. The Monarchs have had a lot of issues recently after a hot start to the season. ULM is also on a tough skid after a promising start to the year, and it's an interesting swing game here. Old Dominion still in Sunbelt title contention. I just think ULM not quite good enough this year, but Brian Vincent still doing some great stuff with this squad. It's just tough. It's an uphill battle. They don't have much of a passing game. They're going to have to really condense this one if they want a shot at taking out the Monarchs. Indiana on the road versus Maryland. Maryland in a tough spot here. They are at home. Indiana is obviously really extremely good. There's been some light hot seat buzz for Mike Locksley that I've seen. I don't know if I quite buy that because of all the promising young players that Maryland has. I feel like we kind of knew this might be another bit of a transition year for the Terrapins. Indiana just shows up and just dog walks teams every week. It's been very impressive, and I expect them to do the same versus Maryland this week. Michigan State heads on the road to play Minnesota. Michigan State's head coach, Jonathan Smith, it feels like is a walking dead man at this point. The buzz that is coming out of East Lansing about him is insane. Like, they're speaking as if he's already fired. It's only his second season, and yet you can kind of see it. Michigan State has looked awful for the most part this year. They've been very disappointing. This was a year they thought they could take another step forward, and Minnesota has had a lot of pleasantly surprising things. They're coming off of a blowout, bloodbath loss to Iowa, but that was on the heels of their best win of the season against Nebraska. So if I know PJ Fleck, they're going to bounce back and they're going to win this one like 19-16 or whatever. Minnesota has been a model of consistency under Fleck. I called the blowout loss to Iowa last weekend, and then I called their win over. Actually, I didn't call their win over Nebraska, so I can't claim that one. But what I can claim is a Minnesota win this weekend over Michigan State, and that's what I'll leave that as before I I lie again. Louisiana hits the road to play South Alabama in the Sun Belt. South Alabama got their first FBS win of the season over Georgia State last week, but they almost let it slip away. They have not been a super promising team. Louisiana's obviously been disappointing, but I think Michael Desormeaux's squad goes on the road and is actually able to get one from South Alabama. I just think they'll be ready for this one, and I just don't see things slipping even lower for Louisiana this year. I think they'll find a way. New Mexico State at Western Kentucky in the CUSA. New Mexico State has had some bright spots for sure, but Western Kentucky just a few more, and they've started to right some of the wrongs from their early season, and Western Kentucky still in that conference title picture in the CUSA. Virginia at Cal. Virginia has just been living and been the cardiac Cavaliers this year. 3 overtime victories now. So many spots where they could have lost, where they just find a way to win. They get the stop on the 2-point conversion versus North Carolina. Just absurd stuff. And now Cal, a Cal team that is decent. They're not a great Cal team. We've seen them lose some ugly games. We've seen them get blown out by bad competition. But they've also had a few games where they've been pleasantly surprising. And I think their defense underrated. Their offense at times has had some sparks. Obviously, the inconsistency has led to some of those dud performances this year, but they've got exciting young players and guys to be excited about. I think that they're going to be able to get a win versus a Virginia team that's been battling a war of attrition, just like a lot of other teams this year, but they've been flirting with disaster, and we've seen time and time again, those teams that consistently flirt with disaster every week, eventually it catches up with them, and I think this is where it catches up with them versus Cal. In the Big 12, Oklahoma State heads on the road to play Kansas. No life for the Cowboys. Kansas, a devastating blowout loss to Kansas State last weekend. They must just be cursed versus the Wildcats. I think they get a bounce-back victory, though. Here, in terms of bowl game, let me see where Kansas is at. 5-4, that would put them a game away from bowl eligibility. That's mostly accurate. Sometimes that's not. But, yeah, game away. Bowl game would be a success for Lance Leipold's squad this year, for sure. Mississippi State at Arkansas is one of 2 games that I would call the toilet bowls in the SEC. We got Mississippi State at Arkansas, Kentucky at Auburn. Arkansas losing a heartbreaker to Auburn last week where they just absolutely imploded in on themselves in the second half. Mississippi State, no stranger to heartbreakers either, though. They end up losing in overtime to Texas. They lost an overtime game to Tennessee. They lost a 2-point game to Florida where they were in field goal range and threw a game-losing interception. Arkansas has also lost some other heartbreakers, the game to Memphis. This is just like heartbreaker central in the SEC. You're asking me who I think the better team is. I think it's Mississippi State. The fact that they have to go in Fayetteville feels wrong and dirty, but I think Mississippi State finally finds a way to grit out their first SEC win of the year. That gets them to 5 wins. They're now 1 away from bowl eligibility if they clutch this one up. And I think they'll get there. I just think they'll find a way to squeeze out the 2 wins they need, but it's going to be extremely difficult down the stretch here. Central and Western Michigan have both had solid seasons in the MAC this year, and now a big clash here between a couple of head coaches that I really like. Matt Drinkle for Central Michigan, Lance Taylor for Western Michigan. This is a big-time rivalry game. I think Western Michigan is actually going to get the win here, despite Central Michigan's little run that they've been on recently. I just like Western Michigan a little bit more. I think they win this one at home. Of course, they're coming off the loss to Miami of Ohio. That team is rolling in the MAC right now. I don't know if anyone in the MAC is capable of beating them with how they're currently playing. Let's go to the Big 12 for a classic Pac-12 matchup. Arizona hits the road to play Colorado. Colorado coming off a bloodbath, blowout loss to Utah. A lot just kind of fell apart, and you just feel like maybe is their season over? I don't quite think so. I think they've still got some fight left in them. I think they still could scrap their way and find their way to a bowl game, but this is a must-win against Arizona. It doesn't matter how ugly the loss was to Utah. You were underdogs anyways. Arizona has shown some good stuff, but I think as the season has gone on, the mask has slipped a little, and we've seen that Arizona, not that great of a team, still with some serious flaws. It has improved from last year, but I like Colorado at home, actually, to get a win here. I think they've looked really solid at home. They had a great, tough test against a good Georgia Tech team at the start of the year. They ended up testing BYU in that game, and then they have the win over Iowa State. So Colorado has a lot to hang their hat on at home, and there's something to be said about some of those home performances they've had this season. Wyoming, coming off of a win last weekend over Colorado State, they've actually gotten a few more wins than they did last year already under Jay Sawvel. It's been a big, much-needed turnaround this season after how badly things went last year, and now they play a San Diego State team that's on an absolute tear. It's going to take a lot here, but I don't think they can stop Sean Lewis's squad with just a soul-crushing defense. I'd be surprised if Wyoming gets any points on the board. San Diego State has pitched 3 shutouts this year. One of them was versus Cal. One of them was versus Fresno State. That is supremely impressive. So watch out for the Aztecs this season in the Mountain West. I mean, they're favored to make the Mountain West title game at this point, so it's not even a hot take to say that. In fact, some might even argue that's just stating the obvious. So I give them a win over Wyoming. Next up, we got Purdue at Michigan. Purdue, a heartbreaking loss to Rutgers on that walk-off field goal, but I think they've still got a little bit of fight left. Michigan should take care of business here and get another win. Obviously, a must-win for Sharon Moore. There are some people that are pretty disgruntled with how the season has gone for the Wolverines, but I think they get another win here and keep marching on. It feels like it might all come down to that Ohio State game, if I'm being honest. South Carolina hits the road to play Ole Miss. Ole Miss has looked great, and they get another win last week against Oklahoma, and now they play a South Carolina team that showed a lot of fight versus Alabama. They nearly took out the Crimson Tide, and I'll tell you what, if they did successfully just finish that game versus Alabama, there'd be a lot different conversation going on here. Instead, most people are all Ole Miss. I'm going to pick Ole Miss as well, but I'm a little terrified if I'm a Rebels fan just because of what South Carolina showed and what we know they're capable of with the exciting skill players that they have. Let's get to another SEC game that completes the quad of just terrible games in the SEC or of terrible teams facing off. And it's not even that they're terrible. It's that their seasons have gone terrible. Kentucky, winless in conference play. Auburn, 1 win in conference play. It was over Arkansas last weekend. So this is another one where something's got to give. One of these teams that's been struggling and failing in these games has to step it up. Kentucky ends up losing in overtime to Texas in that heartbreaker. Auburn has that overtime loss to Missouri. Neither of these two teams are strangers to miserable losses. Auburn has had identity crisis after identity crisis trying to figure out their stuff this season. And at home, I just think they'll win. Auburn, I think, based on everything that they've shown, is a better team than Kentucky. Wildcats have been on the wrong side of some blowouts. Auburn, meanwhile, has just lost heartbreaker after heartbreaker. So I think they get a win here and weirdly building some positive momentum. I think this gets them to 5-4 on the year. If we're going to just double check here like we've been doing, that gets them to 5-4. Bowl game in play. Who knows? Hugh Freeze is a dead man walking right now. If Auburn beats Alabama and finishes with 7 wins in the year, I think he gets another year because that would be huge. So who knows? They get Alabama in Jordan-Hare. The season might come down to that game. You can't afford to lose this one, obviously. Otherwise, Freeze won't be the guy probably by the time they're playing Alabama. In the ACC, Wake Forest coming off of a very nice victory over a team that was still undefeated in conference play in SMU. Now they have to go on the road to play Florida State. Florida State has been truly tragically awful in these ACC games this year. They have just had choke after choke after choke. It's been very sad to see their collapse, a team I bought into, and Wake Forest has given me just a little bit more reason to trust them this season. So I think Florida State is favored handsomely in this game, but I'm going to rock with Wake Forest. I think they get the job done, and it's crazy how the narratives in Florida State's season have flip-flopped back and forth, and now it's just a lot of pain and misery for the Seminoles. Can't help but feel for them a little bit. Georgia Tech heads on the road to play NC State. NC State is totally and perfectly capable of winning this football game, but Georgia Tech, time and time again, has answered the call. One of my offseason darlings as well. I've been so pleasantly surprised with this team. I'm so glad I was high on them to rank them in the offseason and have them where they're at. They've had a few kind of suspect slow starts on the road this year. That's important to note. I'm talking about that one against Colorado where they just decided to turn the ball over 1,000 times. At Wake Forest, they arguably should have lost. So just to keep an eye out for that, but they definitely performed well the last time they went on the road. I think they'll respond again here and get another win. But NC State, they've got some offensive firepower, so we got to keep an eye out for that one. We've got one half of the Pac-2 championship, Washington State at Oregon State. Let me tell you something about the Cougars. They have quietly been playing like a really, really good team recently. They arguably should have beat Virginia if it weren't for a boneheaded special teams play and safety at the end there that ended up costing it. They also had to choke a lead to even get to that point. They arguably could have beaten Ole Miss when they went into Oxford and ended up only losing by a field goal, but they punched those guys in the mouth. That's a top 10 team in college football, nearly top 5 at this point, and Washington State arguably should have beat them, and then they blow out Toledo, a talented team in the MAC, 28-7 last weekend. So you talk about how Washington State has been playing lately. They've been playing really good. Oregon State, on the other hand, they got their first win of the season against Lafayette the other week. They did end up, winning that game by a lot, but it was an FCS team, and they're coming off of a bye. They've already fired their head coach. It feels like everything's going in Washington State's direction. However, there have been a couple different moments this year where Oregon State has also shown their potential. You talk about that game versus Houston. Oregon State arguably should have, well, not even arguably. They had the lead and the ball with 8 minutes left by 14. So they definitely should have won that one. You had that heartbreaker that they had versus Fresno State earlier in the year. You had that heartbreaker against App State where they were on the goal line several times. So Oregon State has shown flashes and signs of life in their own right. There's just as many scenarios where the Beavs are 3-4 rather than the 1-7 record they're at right now. Ouch, by the way. And so it's an interesting conversation. I think Oregon State gets up and gets motivated for this one. And I think you're just talking about a team and a program that wants it more, and they're at home. So I think they pull off a bit of a stunner to some people that just look at Oregon State's record and aren't familiar with the way some of their games they have played this year panned out down the stretch. And I think the Beavs get a bit of a stunning victory here. USC at Nebraska in the Big Ten is a massive, massive game. Both teams at 2 losses. This is effectively a playoff knockout game. Nebraska just announced they signed Matt Rule to a 2-year extension. That's pretty big news for the program. I think they'll come out more motivated in this one. I think if that news didn't come out, maybe Nebraska might come out flat and just look dejected. But no, their head coach is going to be there. I think they'll come out spirited. I think they'll punch USC in the mouth, but I think the Trojans are ready for it. USC, a team that it feels like is also sort of in desperation mode. We've already watched them in an impressive spot get a nice win against Michigan. This one's on the road. This one feels a little different. USC didn't play terrible versus Notre Dame last week either. I think they'll play really well here, and I think they get a win. They're a scrappy, scrappy team. Their season still is going to come down to that Oregon game, essentially, in terms of trying to avoid that 3rd loss, as long as they win this one. If they lose this one, oh boy, watch out, because they still have to play Oregon. That could hit them with 4 losses. UCLA's playing really well. What happens if Lincoln Riley loses 5 games this year? Who knows? Who knows what happens? Oklahoma and Tennessee clash in the SEC. Tennessee and Josh Heupel, emotional game versus the Sooners. And let me tell you, Oklahoma's a team that I really liked in the offseason. A team I really put a lot of stock on. They were in my college football playoff. I thought the offense could really transform. And the offense arguably did. It's a lot better than it was last season, but it has been extremely clunky and unreliable in conference play. They put out that performance versus Texas. Against Ole Miss, they were able to respond a little bit, but there was a couple broken coverages and big run plays that without Oklahoma would have really had a lot less points on the board in that game. So I just have a little bit more confidence in Tennessee at this point. The consistency at which their offense is able to produce. And Tennessee's lost in a couple of their biggest games this year, but I think that ends here where they get their biggest win of the season. Tennessee, obviously, more flawed on the defensive side of the football. Oklahoma, obviously, great on the defensive side, but Oklahoma's also shown some leakage. They showed that versus Ole Miss, and I think Tennessee's kind of at that level in terms of their offensive proficiency. So give me the Volunteers to get a win over the Sooners in that one. Arkansas State hits the road to play Troy. Troy has been phenomenal in the Sun Belt. Arkansas State, though, deserves their flowers for the way they've been able to consistently find ways to win games. It is back-to-back seasons now where I think Arkansas State is the worst team, but in between the white lines most weeks they go out there, and yet Butch Jones and his staff just squeeze wins out of this team. And at this point, you just got to think maybe Vegas just hasn't caught up, because it's been pretty stunning the number of times Arkansas State has looked outmatched and outgunned, and then they find a way to win. I don't think it happens here. I think Troy wins, but just something I've observed, and maybe I should get those numbers, because I can imagine and have a feeling that those are pretty impressive and pretty stunning numbers to look at. Cincinnati, Utah is college game day. It is the game I will be at. It is a 8:15 p.m. local time kickoff in Utah. It is going to be awesome. It's going to be under the lights. It's really going to make up for the fact that Texas Tech Utah was a 9 a.m. local kickoff, or maybe 10 a.m. local in Utah time. And it's going to be really awesome. Cincinnati's a team that has quietly become one of the hottest teams in the Big 12 this year, with their ability to run the football, with Brendan Sorsby, a quarterback, his ability to protect the football. Just 1 pick on the year. He's thrown for 20 touchdowns, I believe, rushed for 5 more. So that's been extremely impressive. It's been one of the big reasons Cincinnati's been able to take that next step this year. They've also gotten better on the defensive side of the football. Utah, however, they have a lot of elite aspects to their team as well. The offense exploded versus Colorado. I think a lot more of that had to do with Utah asserting themselves. Their offensive line can dominate a football game. Cincinnati's had some leakage on the defensive side of the ball. So Utah, I think, perfectly capable of exposing that, and having Dampier back, that's going to add another element and dimension to their offense. But do they even really need the passing game to go off here? I don't think so. I think they can control this game running the ball. They've had the best rushing attack in the Big 12 so far this season. I think that'll be the difference. I think they win this one. Utah minus 9.5, though, feels a little steep. I might take Cincinnati plus the points there, because I think they'll be competitive and they'll be able to respond. finally, we got the nightcap, Hawaii at San Jose State. Hawaii has been such a pleasant surprise to watch this season. San Jose State's still plenty decent in the Mountain West, but more often than not, San Jose State has failed in these types of spots. So Hawaii, I think, wins this one and keeps the magic going this season. This one, I believe, would get Hawaii to 7-2 on the year. So how about those Rainbow Warriors this season? That just about does it. That is every single pick for every single Week 10 college football game. You'll have to let me know down in the comments. What do you think of my picks? What picks do you disagree with? What picks do you agree with? All that great stuff. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys in this video. I will link this website to make your own predictions, as well as my Discord down in the bio below for great college football discourse and discussion throughout the weekend and throughout the week. And that is all I have. So I will see you guys next week. College football season getting into a pretty exciting point of the year. So looking forward to seeing you guys next week, and I will see you next week.